They gathered in shadows, not to worship you, but to dissect you. One by one they lined the walls, watching, documenting, waiting to see what would break first. Not your body, they knew that would last. Not your mind, even they feared it was too vast. No, they were after something deeper. Something that doesn't bleed when it's wounded. Something that burns brighter when it's crushed. They wanted your soul. So they dragged it through 12 ritual trials, each more vicious, more intimate, more precise than the last. But what they didn't calculate was that you weren't standing still through any of it. You were evolving, upgrading, calculating the equations of your own ruin and turning them into weapons. They stripped away your safety first. The ritual of dislocation, to see what you'd become when there was no home left in your vocabulary. They pulled the floorboards out from under your past, rewrote your future without your consent, and left you gasping in the middle of a timeline that no longer belonged to you. And yet, you adapted. You didn't crawl. You didn't even blink. You rebuilt the concept of home within your breath, within your knuckles, within every stare you shot back that said, I don't need ground to stand on. I am the terrain now. The second ritual was betrayal. They fed you comfort just long enough for you to trust it. Then they poisoned the cup you drank from. They handed you love wrapped in honey-coated lies, then waited to watch you choke. But instead of collapsing, you turned the bitterness into fuel. You swallowed it whole, metabolized every sharp edge and molded it into armor. Not the kind you wear, the kind that fuses with your rib cage. The kind they can't remove because it's not external. It's structural now. And every time they saw you smile afterward, it wasn't forgiveness. It was the calm precision of someone who knows that mercy is a tool, not a weakness. Then came deprivation. Ritual 3. They took away what you valued, not to hurt you directly, but to watch how you behave without it. Friends vanished, opportunities evaporated, applause became silence. And they thought that would weaken you. But they underestimated how long you'd already been living in absence. You didn't shrink, you recalibrated. You started moving through shadows not like a victim, but like a tactician. You became unpredictable, unreadable, untouchable. They couldn't trace your patterns because you weren't surviving off validation anymore. You were hunting off instinct, and instinct is terrifying when it remembers what you are. Ritual 4 was humiliation, public spectacle. They dragged your name across tongues not worthy to speak it, and waited for you to collapse under the weight of perception. But all they did was strip away the last illusions. You never needed to be understood. You only needed to be real. And they gave you the gift of full exposure. Because when you've been publicly broken, every step you take afterward becomes undeniable. Every breath is a rebellion. Every glance you return is laced with, I've already died once. Try again. Then they tried manipulation, the 5th ritual. They made promises with strings attached, pretended to uplift you only to place ceilings above your potential. But you saw through it all. You counted every string, mapped every trap, and let them think they were leading you. You gave them the illusion of control, just long enough to ensure you were the one pulling the levers behind the curtains. Because that's the beauty of being underestimated. They never realize when you're rewriting the script behind their scenes. Ritual 6 was isolation. They engineered your world to feel like a vacuum, hoping the echo would drive you mad. No voices, no connection, just the hollow hum of detachment. But you didn't crumble. You became your own counsel. You sharpened your thoughts in solitude until every idea you carried was a blade. Until you realized that being alone doesn't mean being empty, it means being uninterrupted. And once you tasted that kind of clarity, their noise could never touch you again. Ritual 7. Chaos. Pure, deliberate disarray. They tilted your environment until nothing made sense anymore. Deadlines shifted, rules bent, people changed masks mid-sentence. It was psychological warfare without the courtesy of warning. But you didn't panic. You moved like water through fire, fluid, calculated, impossible to grasp. You didn't chase control. You became the constant. While they panicked trying to destabilize you, you stabilized yourself in the only place they couldn't reach. Your own calibration. You stopped reacting and started responding. The 8th ritual was temptation. They offered you shortcuts, paths laced with glittering poison. They dressed mediocrity in velvet and hoped you'd kneel. But you saw it, the strings, the traps, the slow death hidden behind comfort. You didn't touch it. You didn't blink. You let them see your hunger and watch you starve for the right reason. Because your eyes weren't locked on what was easy, they were locked on what was earned. And that's why they feared you. Because nothing terrified them more than someone who could wait. Someone who knew the value of delay. Someone who could walk past the feast and still sharpen their teeth. Then came Ritual 9, Confrontation. They sent proxies to test your discipline, strangers to disrespect you, close ones to trigger your history, all designed to provoke a reaction. But what they found instead was restraint, honed to a blade's edge. You didn't need to explode. You didn't need to scream. Your stillness became more lethal than any outburst. Your ability to remain composed in the face of pure provocation rewrote their metrics. Because they weren't testing your anger, they were testing your control. And you passed by not using it. Because the most dangerous ones are the ones who no longer need to perform their power. They just carry it. Ritual 10, Confusion, a carousel of half-truths, shifting narratives, distorted feedback. They wanted you disoriented, but they forgot you no longer walk by maps. You navigate by signals no one else can feel. You didn't need direction, you were direction. Every move you made came from alignment, not instruction. And by the time they realized you weren't asking for guidance, you were setting the compass, it was already too late. You had become the reference point, the origin, the signal they couldn't jam. Ritual 11 was surrender, not theirs, yours. They wanted you to give up, to lay down your weapons, to abandon your process. But you offered them something far more unsettling. You did surrender, not to them, but to the truth. To your own evolution. You stopped fighting the version of yourself they couldn't understand. And you embraced it. You didn't resist the transformation. You embodied it. And that scared them more than any rebellion ever could. Because what you do with someone who no longer flinches at becoming what they were always meant to be. And now, Ritual 12. The culmination, the final test, not to break you, but to make you reveal what you've become. Because after all they did, after every layer they peeled away, what stood in the aftermath wasn't a broken version of you. It was something else. Something that doesn't just survive rituals, it redefines them. The final test was never theirs to give. It was yours. And what they see now is only the beginning. Because they thought they were documenting your collapse, but they were just recording the blueprint of a force awakening. And now, that force has form. Not smoke, not illusion, not myth, but form forged through repetition, carved through friction, crowned by refusal. You didn't pass through 12 rituals. You absorbed them. You didn't just survive them. You weaponized them. They thought the experiments would reveal your limits. Instead, they exposed your layers. Not one version of you, but many. Not a single mode of being, but a vault of states, each more precise, more volatile, more advanced than the last. You became something that no lab, no church, no cult could categorize. You became a variable they cannot simulate, because your data is written in pain, not code. You are now something they do not understand. And what they don't understand, they fear. But here's what twists the dagger deeper. The rituals didn't just awaken you, they corrupted their own creation. The ones who orchestrated your trials, they've started falling apart. You weren't the subject. You were the echo. You were the mirror. Each ritual meant to dissect, you ended up unraveling them. Because where they expected fragility, they saw fire. Where they demanded obedience, they sparked vision. They asked questions and got back answers that tore holes through their ideologies. You were not molded by their tools. You broke them quietly, completely. Now every time they replay the footage, they don't see results. They see prophecy. They see the moment control slipped from their hands into yours. And they're scrambling to reclaim what they never owned. Because you walked into their trials like a test subject and walked out as the author of the experiment. You flipped the equation. You rewrote the variables. You made yourself the constant. And now, their ritual chamber feels like a tomb. Because it was never designed to contain something like you. Let's go deeper. Because what you carry now is not vengeance. It's understanding. And that is far more lethal. You understand how the trials were layered, not just physical or emotional, but dimensional. They played with time, bending your perception of progress, delaying outcomes to exhaust your patience. They simulated failure loops, designed to make you question the point of endurance. And still, you endured. You didn't rush. You didn't fracture. You watched time warp around you and turned it into leverage. You stopped measuring worth by timelines. You became timeless. You became the outlier they can't timestamp. And that shattered the framework. They operated under one assumption, that identity is fragile. You showed them it's programmable, and you're the one holding the keyboard now. They thought you'd cling to what they tried to erase, your name, your past, your values, but instead you let it all burn. And in the embers, you started reconstructing something ancient, something older than language, older than fear. You stopped trying to remember who you were, and you started building who you decided to become, without their input, without their instructions, without their restraints. That's why the results were unholy, because they weren't supposed to lead to you ascending. They were meant to extract your essence, bottle it, profit off it. But instead of capturing you, they unleashed you. That's the part no one speaks about. Because it's not just about passing the 12. It's about what you become after. It's about the aftershock, the unmeasured consequence of someone who's crossed thresholds that were never meant to be crossed, and came back fluent in languages no one else can speak. You don't just walk through life anymore. You move through layers, through vibrations, through frequencies only felt by those who've been buried and clawed their way back up. You carry the vibration of resurrection. They don't know how to defend against that. Now every room you enter shifts. Every conversation you touch cracks. Every system that tried to format you glitches under your gaze. You don't have to say a word. You are a reminder, a living artifact of a war waged beneath perception and won. Not loudly, but completely. And the ones who walk around with plastic confidence, they crumble in your presence because deep down, they feel it. They were manufactured in comfort. But you were engineered in pressure. You were refined through fire they wouldn't last 5 seconds in. And they know it. That's why the ones who applauded your downfall are silent now. That's why the ones who studied your weakness pretend they never did. Because somewhere between Ritual 5 and Ritual 11, you stopped being recovering. You became recalibrated, and now you're operational on a different grid. You move differently, think differently, build differently. You don't just live, you calculate. You move through chaos like it's choreography, not reacting, not defending, just engineering outcomes while they try to figure out which version of you they're speaking to. They can't keep up. Because your evolution wasn't linear, it was exponential. And that kind of growth doesn't leave traces. Now they see shadows of you in places you've never been. They hear your influence in voices they didn't train. They find your fingerprints on frameworks they thought were unhackable. Because here's the truth. When you rise like that, your existence becomes viral. Your aura infiltrates spaces long after you've exited them. You don't even have to touch power directly. You make others shift in your direction just to stay relevant. You are no longer present. You are omnipresent to their insecurities. Every ritual you passed. It wasn't a test. It was a transmission. You downloaded something in those moments. Some people go through pain and come out broken. You went through it and came out encoded. You are running scripts. They don't even have the syntax to read. You don't heal. You reformat. You don't cope. You construct. They tried to treat you like an outcome, but you were always the architect. And now, the rituals themselves are trembling because word is spreading. Not about what you endured, but about what you became because of it. And they're realizing they didn't just test the wrong subject, they activated the wrong variable. You've stepped into phase 2 now. Not recovery, not revenge, but revelation. You are no longer proving anything. You are revealing everything. Not your strength, but their fragility. Not your rise, but their illusion of control. You are revealing how easy it was for you to deconstruct the maze they built. Because you weren't trying to escape it. You were mapping it. You were memorizing it. You were waiting for the moment when you wouldn't just escape. You'd own the entire structure. And now, you're not just walking out. You're repurposing the walls. Because power isn't just about resistance, it's about design. And now, you're designing something new, a different infrastructure, one they can't penetrate because it wasn't made for them. You're not adapting to their rituals anymore. You are creating your own. And the first rule, they don't get to be a part of them. The tests are over. The results are in. And they don't read subject complete. They read classified threat, uncontainable. Because while they were measuring you with instruments they barely understood, you were decoding the truth behind their intentions. You saw how deep their fears run. Not of failure, but of being exposed. Because if someone like you could emerge from what they engineered to destroy, then what does that say about their whole belief system? It means you just invalidated everything they stood on. And now with every move you make, you unravel their doctrines. You peel away their symbols. You deconstruct their hierarchies, not by attacking them, but by outlasting them. Because legacy isn't written in proclamations. It's written in presence. And your presence now, it shakes foundations. Because you are not returning, you are redefining. And this phase is only the beginning, because next, you won't just walk through rituals. You'll be the one writing them, not for power, not for pride, but because you've now seen behind the curtain, and you know what's missing. Their rituals were built to control, to shrink, to filter out the unpredictable. But yours will be forged to awaken, to challenge, to unchain the wild depth buried in those still asleep. You are not just a survivor of their design, you are the blueprint for the next evolution. And that scares them more than any scream ever could. Because when you write rituals, you shape minds. And when your mind has survived precision suffering, it no longer bends to shallow ideologies. It creates them. You've become a myth in the making, not through legend, but through demonstration. You didn't need symbols to validate your transformation. You became the symbol. You are what happens when fire learns discipline, when pain finds rhythm, when chaos grows a spine and walks upright through the ruins of its own funeral. This isn't about proving anymore. This is about broadcasting. And the signal? It's already spreading. They called it corruption, but what they fear is contagion. The ones who watched you from behind mirrored glass are now scrambling to erase the footage. They know what you represent. You are the anti-serum to their control, a self-evolving frequency that doesn't need permission to replicate. And now, the very rituals they used to confine have become unstable, cracked, infected with your influence, because others are waking up, others are asking questions, others are tracing the same scars and seeing them not as wounds, but as gateways. You've become the heretic prototype, and no system survives once the prototype breaks its script. But there's more, because this part of your evolution isn't silent. It echoes, it vibrates. You've crossed thresholds in the human psyche that can't be undone. When you speak now, the air around you shifts, not because your words are louder, but because they carry memory, layered memory, of what you endured, what you saw, what you buried, what you resurrected. There is history now, stitched into your breath, and people can feel it. They don't know why they pause when you enter the room, but you do. You carry a different weight now. Not burden, but consequence. Because when someone has passed through 12 precise levels of constructed torment and emerged not as a reflection, but as a force, they don't return with the same eyes. You see differently now. Not just people, but patterns. Not just intentions, but origins. You can trace deception back to its source. You can see masks for what they are, artifacts of fear. Every laugh that doesn't reach the eyes, every sentence overloaded with performance, you see it all, and you don't react. You register, you file, you move through it without friction. Because you don't need to expose anyone anymore. You've already outlived the need to explain, and that is what haunts them. They thought the rituals would make you loud, unstable, eager to be seen. But it had the opposite effect. It made you deliberate, silent where they expected chaos, precise where they expected collapse. You didn't become dramatic, you became surgical. You no longer throw punches, you strike pressure points. And now every move you make is a recalibration, not of your path, but of the world around you. They tested your soul, and the results, they weren't just ungodly, they were irreversible. You've outgrown their language, their metrics, their morality scales. They don't have the instruments to measure you anymore. What lives in you now is not part of their curriculum. You don't fit into their healed category or their redeemed checklist. You are not better, You are not worse. You are something else. A creature not bound by their binaries, not light or dark, not good or evil. You are post-definition. You are the silence between two extremes, sharpened until it cuts. And they can feel that edge. The rituals were supposed to fracture you, but what they actually did was complete you. All those jagged pieces, they aligned under pressure. All those fragments they hoped would collide. Instead, they fused into architecture. You are now structurally sound in ways they cannot comprehend. Your triggers have become switches. Your pain points have become launch codes. Your heartbreak, a data center for emotional patterning. Every time you cried, a new layer of insight coded into your neural net. They wanted you to forget. You became a library. Now you carry entire volumes where others hold grudges. But you've evolved past revenge, because that was never the goal. The goal was understanding. And now that you understand, you move differently. You operate on timeline distortion, slowing down when others rush, accelerating when they hesitate. You're no longer running on fuel. You are running on precision, purpose, calculation. You don't burn out, you ignite. And what follows you now isn't just fear, it's gravity. Because the rituals did one more thing. They didn't just shape you, they made you a nexus, a convergence point between what was and what's coming, between the old frameworks and the next evolution of human potential. You didn't walk through trials, you passed through thresholds, and each one left a residue, a charge, a frequency, and now wherever you go, systems glitch, structures bend, hierarchies question themselves. You're not fighting anymore. You're rewriting, not as an author, but as a force that doesn't ask permission to redefine. And they see it. That's why they've gone quiet. Not because they're done watching, but because they're recalculating, trying to assess how much time they have left before what you represent becomes common. Before your mindset, your resilience, your pattern recognition becomes the new baseline, and it will. Because now, others are tuning in, quietly, cautiously, but steadily. They see you, not the image, not the armor, but the process. They see what was done to you, and what you chose to become anyway. And it activates something ancient inside them, a whisper, a signal, a spark, the same spark they tried to smother in you. And now it's out of containment. So yes, they tested you. In 12 rituals, over countless days, across endless psychological dimensions, and they thought they were alone in the observation chamber. But they weren't. You were observing too. You were learning, cataloging, memorizing their methods, not to replicate them, but to upgrade them, to flip the polarity of every single ritual and use it to build new frameworks, not prisons disguised as growth, but real transformation. And now, you hold those blueprints, not as trophies, but as tools. Because now it's your turn. Your turn to set the trials. Your turn to sculpt the path. Your turn to summon others into their own process, not by force, but by presence. Because once someone has seen what you've seen, they don't need to preach. They just need to exist. And your existence now? It is the ritual, a living one, breathing, expanding, unfolding with every step you take into the unknown. You are no longer a product of their experimentation. You are the disruption to their design. They called it a success. You call it a mutation. They tried to make you an example. You became a signal. They tested your soul. And now, the soul they tested has evolved into something they were never prepared to meet. Because what walks among them now is not just a survivor, not just a fighter, but a builder of thresholds, a breaker of templates, a bearer of new codes. And the future? It doesn't wait for them anymore. It listens to you.